Hi, everyone. My name is Christina, and I am an alcoholic. Is this good, Lee? Okay. I want to thank Steve, Connie, the committee for having me. An amazing weekend, and what an honor it is to be with all of you. I want to thank Sonia for taking great care of me this weekend. And, the speakers were all amazing. It was a great weekend. And I think we should just give the committee, my husband and I are on a small little committee, and we know what kind of work, it requires to put one of these things on. And so let's just give the committee one last hand. Thank you. Thank you for bringing us together. I want to thank my husband finally for coming along with me this weekend. So we had a lot of fun, and I think I got everything. I hope I didn't forget anyone. There was this old timer by the name of Sandy Beach that once said that Alcoholics Anonymous does not convince us there is a God. But what Alcoholics Anonymous is really good at is convincing us we need to find a God, right? And I didn't struggle with God when I got here. It's not my story. I think from an early age, looking out my bedroom window, looking up into the night sky, I knew there was a loving presence out there, and I knew I was a loved child of God. And somewhere along the lines, slipping down into my alcoholism, I must have put God on a shelf. And you can't serve two gods, right? And you guys, Alcoholics Anonymous, brought me back to my God. And I'm so very grateful for that. My husband and I are from the Akron-Cleveland area. And if you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a little AA history in Akron, Ohio. And our co-founders, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, when they first met, long before we had a book and a program, long before, we had a fellowship, these two men found something special between them. And they would sit, Dr. Bob was in Akron, Bill came from New York, and, when they got together, they would sit around Dr. Bob's kitchen table at 855 Ardmore, and they would have these conversations that would last into the late hours of the evening, early hours of the morning. And these conversations they would have would later formulate what we sit in and what we've sat in all this weekend, our fellowship. And it would formulate our program, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is contained in our book. And Dr. Bob would describe that kitchen table that they sat around as a modest piece of furniture. And I love that. And we'll gather. Early on in our days, we'll gather in people's homes, later in church basements, and then in coffee and ice cream shops. And what we find when we gather together, we find identification, unity, and transformation. And I have absolutely transformed from this process. And I'm going to try this morning to put into words the transformation that has occurred in my life because of this process, and I'm going to fall short. Because words just don't do this thing justice. But words are all we have, right? And thank God for our amazing stories, which so many of us, the speakers talked about all this weekend. And I get to do this deal in AA where I get to wake up to another day sobriety, just like I did this morning in Nashville, Tennessee, to a life beyond my wildest dreams and a life that I don't deserve. And I'm so grateful. I get to be a mother, a daughter, a sister, a wife. I'm an auntie today. I'm a productive and useful member of my community. I pay my taxes. I have good credit, and I get along with my neighbors. And no longer am I a nuisance to those about me, in my community, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing. Thank you, AA. My sobriety date is June 19th, 1993. My home group is Pockets of Enthusiasm. We meet on Thursday nights in a little community called Brecksville, Ohio, where It's about halfway between Akron and Cleveland. 20 minutes north of us is Cleveland, 25 minutes south of us is Akron. So if you're ever in the Akron-Cleveland area on a Thursday night, come see us. We'll have a nice pot of coffee on for you, good fellowship, and a great meeting. My sponsor's name is Pat Y. She's been my sponsor for probably 5.5 years now. And I'm so grateful for her guidance, her direction, and her experience. She keeps me grounded in the steps and the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. My longtime sponsor was a woman named Beth Gordon. And she was my sponsor for most of my sobriety. My first sponsor, I had her for about maybe 3 or 4 years. But Beth sponsored me the rest of the time up until Pat. And she really transformed my sobriety, and how I look at this thing and the things that I do in these rooms. And she passed away right before COVID with 48 years of continuous sobriety. And so, you guys, I was raised by the old timers here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're new, find your old timers. Pull up a chair, sit down next to them. You don't have to have a conversation with them. You don't have to know what to say. Just sit down and listen. I love listening to the stories of our old timers because to me the stories that they're sharing, whether they're up here or at the table, are AA's history, what it was like. I love that. And if you fall in love with Alcoholics Anonymous like I have, you're going to fall in love with our history. And, Akron, we have Founders Day. It's a conference. It's a pretty big conference, much like this, a little bit bigger scale. About 8,000 to 10,000 people embark on Akron every year to celebrate our beginnings, right? When Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson met. And I always try to volunteer on that weekend to do something. And I don't know, it was some years back. I was at the Sunday morning meeting. We just finished up, and I was heading over to Dr. Bob's house because my husband volunteers over there, and I was going to see what he was up to. And he was busy in the business house taking care of some responsibilities, so I walked into 855 Ardmore, Dr. Bob's living room, and as you can imagine, Dr. Bob's is a very busy weekend on Founders Day weekend, and people are filing in from the conference, coming to see the house. It's kind of a pilgrimage. And they quickly realized what they'd walked into because, see, when I walked into that living room, there was an old-timer talking to a couple of guys. But it just so happened that old-timer he stood for being the longest standing member of the sobriety countdown was 67 years. And he was talking to these guys and sharing some stories, and we kind of all filed in, and after a while the room filled up because people quickly realized what was going on there. He sat on the couch, I sat at the old-timer's feet, and we were sitting around and gathering in that room, and he was regaling us with story after story of what it was like when he got here to Alcoholics Anonymous. He knew many of the early founding members, and he knew Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. And, we're starting to think, as we're listening to him share stories, we're starting to think that 67 years is a long time to stay sober. So we asked him how old he was, and he didn't know how old he was. And he said he was somewhere between 97 and 105 years old. And how do you not know how old you are, right? And so we asked him, and he told us another story about how back in the day people were private, and he said his mother may have been a little vain, and she didn't want people to know how old she was, so she didn't share with her son how old he was. And when we asked him what Social Security goes by, he said 105. And why I like to share that story with you is this: that old-timer, 67 years sober, 105 years old, he's from Santa Barbara, California. He's sitting in Akron, Ohio, sitting in a living room, talking to a bunch of alcoholics, right? He's still giving it away. Powerful message for this alcoholic. And I had a friend, a long-timer friend up in Toronto, Canada. His name was Frankie O, Frank Orsini. I don't know if you knew him, Steve. Great guy. Loved him. And, I got word that he passed away, and my heart broke. And I called my grand sponsor at the time, another long-timer. She had 58 years at this time. And I called her and I said, Pat, we're losing our old-timers. She's 58 years sober. She's lost all her old-timers. And I said, Pat, we're losing our old-timers. And she said, Christina, it's time. It's time that we pass the baton on to the next generation. And guess what? Tag, you're it. And I was expressing to her my feelings of inadequacy on such a task, and she just chuckled, as she always did. And she said, Christina, don't worry, because all the instructions are already written out for you, right? And what she's talking about, if you're not sure, is our instructions are in our book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank God for good sponsorship, because I can complicate something so simple. So find those old-timers. I like to talk about identification from the podium. I know that Peter and Jimmy were talking about it. I know that, I think Jeff was talking about it last night. I think identification is extremely important here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got here, I didn't understand this concept, and I'd sit among you and listen to somebody share up here, and I would listen for all the differences and none of the similarities. And I almost compared myself right out of the rooms. And the spirit of identification is extremely important here. It's the crux. It's central to this program and fellowship. I'd just sit among you and I'd start comparing, and I wasn't getting it. But that spirit of identification is everything. It's the hook. And it's the beginning of hope for us when we get here. It took me a long time to figure out that when I sit among you and I listen to somebody share from the podium, that I want to identify with the message, not so much the messenger, right? And I want to listen for 4 things. I want to listen for how we drank, how we felt, how we lived, and drank, felt, thought, and how we lived. Those 4 things are identification in Alcoholics Anonymous. And like I said, it's the beginning of hope. And Bill Wilson, back in the day, before he came to Akron and met Dr. Bob, he had that white light experience, and he was trying to get drunk sober. And he has that famous conversation with Lois. He says, I can't get these guys sober. And Lois says that famous line, Bill, you're staying sober. And he has that aha moment. And then later on, he's talking to Silkworth about the same thing. And Silkworth says, well, Bill, maybe pause on the God thing. Maybe talk about your trouble with drink. And so when Bill is in Akron on a failed business deal, he's going to meet this drunk because he knows he needs to talk to somebody. He knows. Dr. Bob is on his way to the gatehouse. He knows he needs to identify Dr. Bob. And Dr. Bob was only going to give him 15 minutes, and they ended up talking for over 5 hours. Identification. It's extremely important on this end. When you're sharing in a room thinking about the new person, it's very important on both ends. It's important on how we listen, and I don't think we have that conversation enough in here. I used to, this beautiful gift, we talked about the gift this weekend. Oh my gosh, this beautiful gift that we get here. I used to question why some of us get this thing and some of us don't. Why I stand before you in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous this morning, and over the years I've watched people walk out those doors never to return to meet certain and uncertain death. I used to question why him and not me, and why me and not him. And over the years I've come to realize those questions are none of my business. They're really God's business. And that in my humanity, I'm not capable of understanding the answers to those questions. And perhaps I'm asking all the wrong questions, right? Today I know what my business is. Today I know that I have been given and I have accepted this gift. And I need to do the things that you taught me to do, even more so today, 32 years sober, than I did when I first walked through your doors. And ultimately, that means that I need to be a giver and not a taker today. There was a young lady back home, she passed away sober, but she would talk about that gift. She'd describe it as a beautiful box, a gift from her higher power. And as she's opening up her beautiful gift, unwrapping the paper and the bow, she's imagining what this beautiful gift would look like and where she would put it in her home on the mantle or maybe, on a shelf where people would admire it, where she could look at it and be proud. And when she opened up that gift, she didn't find something beautiful. She found dirty, grungy work boots. And I love that story because that's what we get here. We don't get something shiny to put on a shelf. We get busy. We put on work boots. And I find God in the trenches today, right? That's where we find God. Gosh, my parents were great parents. They taught me morals and values. They gave me everything I needed and wanted. And somewhere around 4 years of age, my mom and my dad sat me and my younger sister down and told us they were getting a divorce. And I watched my dad walk out the door that day. And for the first time in my little life, I experienced fear and uncertainty. And that fear would become the backdrop of delusional thinking, skewed perspective. It would just drive all my thoughts, my actions, and my drinking. And in Bill's story, he talks about impending calamity. And I understand impending calamity. I was always afraid of that other shoe falling, what was around that next corner. If things were good, I knew they were going to get bad, and if things were bad, I knew they were just going to get worse. But woven beautifully within the instructions of our steps, it says, and I paraphrase, He enables us to match calamity with serenity. And today I know exactly where my solution lies. Shortly after my dad left home, he was in a car accident because my dad is a big drinker, and he wrapped his car around a telephone pole and nearly died. And I remember my mom, I don't know if it was that night or the next morning, that she would tell me what happened to my dad. He was in ICU and it was life-threatening, and I couldn't understand how someone I loved so much, someone whom I knew loved me, could go out and do something like that. And I just swore I would never be like that. And, I never felt pretty enough. I was never enough. I somehow, early on, I made that decision. I was never enough, and I always felt less than, not pretty enough, not smart enough. I always felt like I was on the outside, in the cold, looking in on everyone living their lives. I felt like I didn't get the memo, right? That would tell you how to be, act, and talk with others. My tongue would get thick. My thoughts wouldn't come. And my peers, just seemed to navigate childhood and adolescence with ease and comfort, while I, on the other hand, would feel ill at ease, awkward, and uncomfortable in my own skin. And I wasn't a finisher, you guys. I didn't finish anything I started. And I knew something was wrong with me. But my first drink would change all of that. It was a warm beer. My sister and I stole some beers, shoved them under the couch. My mom and my new stepdad went to bed. We had a friend over, and I remember drinking that first beer. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I choked it down. It tasted terrible. It was warm. And I didn't like any part of it until I had that effect produced by alcohol. I had this warmth radiate through my body. Excuse me. And it went down to my fingertips and toes. This little radiation of heat went down to my fingertips and toes, and then it went up to my head. And all of a sudden, I was enough. I was smart enough. I was pretty. I could talk to you. My tongue wasn't thick. My thoughts were flowing, and the best part was that I could laugh at your jokes. I was no longer uptight. And I found magic that night. And I went straight for my mother's liquor cabinet, and it was... I pulled out what I saw her drinking the last time she drank, which wasn't often, which was amaretto liqueur. And I got real sick that night. And I couldn't wait to do it again. But I can tell you that I never touched amaretto liqueur ever again. I couldn't stand the taste of amaretto candy or amaretto creamer. But and I was off and running, and I started having problems right out the gate. I think trouble is hindsight. It's 2020, and I was getting into trouble. I wasn't seeing that I was getting into trouble. I'm like hanging out with all these kids. We're just doing the same things. We're just having fun. Mom, get off my case. And I lived with my dad my senior year because I'm having a lot of problems with my mom and my stepdad, And my dad's this big drinker. He let me have the car on the weekends as long as I drop him off at the bars. And the bars that he would frequent would be on Brook Park Road in Cleveland, Ohio. And there's a particular area on Brook Park Road that has a bunch of dark, dank dives and gentlemen clubs. And I drop him off at one of these dives and go off and have the party. And most of the time, the rule was I had to pick him up at closing, and most of the time that happened. There were some oops that I don't share too much at the podium, but I remember picking up him one night at 2:30, and I walked into this joint, and there's a gentleman at the bar drinking the last drink of the night. Well, he probably wasn't a gentleman, but he was drinking, and there was a couple on the dance floor dancing the last dance of the night. And over here in the corner of that bar, it was a dark corner, was my dad. He was sitting at a round table, much like we're sitting at this morning, and it was dark, and he had his hand cupped around the glass, and his eyes lost in the drink. And it took me a long time to figure out what it was about that moment that seared in my memory. And today I know that was the moment that I knew alcohol had my dad. And once again, I swore I would never be like that. Little did I know at this point, I'm already well on my way in my own alcoholism. And my father was an alumni of Ohio University. He was the first in our family to go to college and graduate, and he wanted his oldest daughter to follow in his footsteps. So those plans were made, and my senior year found me doing a lot of partying, and as a result, my class attendance and my grades suffered. And as a result of that, I didn't earn the necessary credits to walk the stage and make that milestone that we were supposed to make. And my thinking at the time was, so what? I'm not hurting anyone. And really, that's not true. Today I know I robbed my parents of the joy and the privilege to watch their oldest daughter make that rite of passage. But I'm selfish and self-centered. And I scrounged up those credits in summer school, and off to school I went, at Ohio University. And I want you to know that OU is a nationally ranked prep school for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had arrived. All the bars were in walking distance, and my parents were 5 hours away. And I saw that they were auditioning for the School of Dance. I loved dance. I was on Kickline and the dance company in high school, and I had no formal training, though. And I decided to go for it. And I went for this audition. They put me in a ballet class, and I had no technique background, and I bombed that first audition. But then they gave me another opportunity, and they put me in a choreography class of which I happened to excel in. And I nailed it, and I'm in. And dance is not a fluffy degree, as one might think. It requires pre-med, so it's anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and biologies. And I had the academic piece and the creative piece all wrapped up into one fine major. And you guys, I found my passion, and I thought I found my future. But my alcoholism was going to take me in a whole different direction. And I really just practiced my craft on the dance floor with a drink in my hand. And OU sent me packing about 2 years later, and I moved up to Ohio State University. I had a boyfriend up there, and, I thought I was going to shower Ohio State with all my talents, but I only really ever talked about that from the bar stool. I'm drinking on High Street where all the college kids are drinking, but I start to move to the outskirts of town because that's how I drink, in those dark corners and those dark joints out in the outskirts. And women, I didn't trust women. You guys were the enemy. I didn't know how to have a friendship and have a girlfriend. I didn't trust you. I didn't get along with anyone. And the women in Alcoholics Anonymous, thank God, taught me how to be a friend by being my friend. You guys showed me about relationships here, and I treasure that today. But that wasn't the case then. There was this one woman, her name was Cherokee, and still to this day I do not think that was her real name. And she ran this traveling dance group, you guys, and she knew I studied dance, if that's what you want to call it. And she had this troop of girls, and they would frequent the dark dank dives and gentlemen clubs, and the girls, they would take off their clothes. And this kind of dancing was beneath me, because I'm thinking I'm a real dancer, right? But there were free drinks to be had, so I rode that wave as long as I could with Cherokee and the girls. But truth be told, we lower our bar and lower it again and again, and I'll sell out all my morals and values for the drink, and I'll cross those lines, and and seek lower companions. And then towards the end of my drinking, I'll end up on Brook Park Road at all those places, right? I'm the queen of geographical cures. I could do one without even going anywhere. And I do things like join Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And I don't know what I was thinking, actually. But I would, I'd go for this interview to be a big sister. I must have been thinking that it would fix me, right? And the interview went really well, but then they want to see my apartment. My apartment's a mess. And my dad used to say something to me. He used to say, Christina, the surroundings that you keep, the company that you find yourself in, it's all a direct reflection of what's going on up here. And he was exactly right. My life was a mess. My apartment was a mess, and everything up here was a mess. And I went home and I cleaned about 75% of that apartment because I'm not a finisher. And I throw all that garbage in that back room, thinking they're not going to want to see my bedroom. And I assure you that agency wanted to see every inch of my apartment. And thank God for the little girls, I did not become a big sister. And then there's the Catholic Diocese in Columbus, Ohio. I tried to join the church, and Mother Superior did not find me a good match, I assure you. And I think she knew exactly what she had in front of her. And I then joined the Army, and they took me. And I knew at this point that they were going to fix me. I knew I needed the structure. It was just going to be what I needed. And as a direct result of my drinking, though, I got discharged from the Army, and I was living on the streets of Cleveland with my collie Shepherd in my car. This is how I'm living, because my parents, I'm breaking their hearts. They're not taking me in, and I'm moving my car from street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood, because I don't want you to see how I'm living. That shame and remorse is already there. And it's in the middle of winter. It's cold. I turn the engine on for a little bit because I don't have any money, and crawl in the back seat, curl up with that dog. We'd keep warm. I'd turn off the engine and finish out the night. And the next morning, I would let that poor dog out of his prison, and I'd brush that fur off my body and sneak into restaurant bathrooms and try to brush my teeth and take a bird bath. And I'd be horrified if you caught me. And I ended up on a dead-end street with my dog in the back, drinking a six-pack. There's a brick building in front of me. I'm trying to figure out how fast I need to plow my car into that wall and not survive. And I end up finishing my drinks, and I end up on Brook Park Road at a hotel bar. It was ladies' night, I remember, and I walked in, and there was a couple guys from high school that I had recognized, and these guys were nice guys. I didn't hang out with nice guys, and they found out I was living in my car, and one of them invited me to stay with him and his family, which consisted of his mom, his dad, his sister, her husband, and their children, and they welcomed me with open arms. And they had this dynamic about them, you guys, that was so attractive. And they were warm, and they talked, and they shared, and I just was so attracted to that. And I always wanted that for my family. And I never thought I had that with my mom and my dad and my sisters, and I would always treat them horribly because of it, put my expectations harshly on them. And today I know I have a beautiful family. The problem was never them, it was always Christina. But we're at this dinner table one night, this lovely family, this young man and his mom and his dad, and my drinking becomes a topic of discussion, and I find myself in an Alcoholics Anonymous household because the father of this young man was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he took me to my very first meeting. It was a Thursday night. It was on Triscuit Avenue in Cleveland. I remember two things about that meeting. I remember that it was very smoky. You could cut the room in half with the smoke in that room. And I remember that you guys were really happy. And on the back of that, I never heard a word you guys said. But something allowed me to go back to another meeting the next night. And that was the West Clifton group in Lakewood, Ohio. And I walked into that meeting, 300 large. I sat in the back. I'm getting ready to hightail it out of there early as the meeting's wrapping up, and there's this young man walking towards me. And he has a look on his face like he knows who I am. You know that look. I had no idea who he was. And here he thought I was my sister who spent a year in Alcoholics Anonymous for her drinking. And he thought I was her. He had these dark eyes, this dark hair. He's real handsome. and I took a hostage. And the long and short of that story was those 2 meetings would be the last 2 I'd go to for a bit. And this young man, his name was Rick, we'd have this crazy, turbulent, violent relationship, and we had 2 beautiful children together. And in 1992, he had 9 years sober. He loved Alcoholics Anonymous. Very active. He came home on Sweetest Day evening with a bottle of champagne. And he said, honey, I think I was just too young. I think I can drink safely again. And I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I didn't know anything about alcoholism. But I knew this. I knew he was in trouble. But I do what I do, right? And he popped open that bottle of champagne, and we drank it together. And my alcoholism went off in this direction, and his alcoholism picked up right where it left off 9 years prior, and then some, because of that progression, right? And he went off in this direction, and we didn't really cross paths much. And my alcoholism took me to dark places, doing dark things with dark people. You guys, I burned every bridge there was to burn, and I hurt my loved ones, and I darn near physically and emotionally, abandoned my 2 babies. And the type of mother that I was when I finally got to you was this. I would come to at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, hungover, sick, not in a good place to be a good mom to my babies. And my babies would be locked in their cribs at 2 p.m., right? Hungry for breakfast, their mother's love and attention. They'd have their diapers saturated with urine and feces. They'd been in all night, all day. And I was just incapable of all of the above. And I'd leave my children with people who were no better suited than I was just to get to the drink. I would leave them. I didn't want to be like my dad, and I would leave them anywhere so they wouldn't see their mom drinking. And I would leave them in bad situations. And there's this one situation that I like to share with you because I think it's important for me to remember that I left them with a couple. They were in bad shape. My youngest was 5 months old. He was just starting to crawl. And I left them with this couple, and they left them unattended, and my 5-month-old crawled behind their couch and got pinned, and he remained pinned for over 5 hours. And that is the type of mother that I am when I put alcohol into my body. All bets are off, even my children. And I want you to know, more than anything, I love my children. I did then, and I do today. But no human power, right? I would have that battle going on in my head between my babies and that drink. And you know who won that battle, and you know who lost every single time. So there's a series of events that occur that bring me to my last drunk. And my last drunk, I'm face down on the west side of Cleveland in some joint. And I'm coming to a voice. It's Rick. And he has my children in his arms. And I'll never forget the words that he spoke and the tone of his voice when he spoke those words and the look on his face when he dropped my babies on my back and said, "Get up and be the mother that you are supposed to be to these kids." And he turned around and walked out. And at that moment, you guys, I knew that pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization our literature talks about. And I scooped up those boys. I was probably still drunk. And I drove them home. And I believe that day, that something was cracked open in me, and I was given that advanced grace we talk about here in Alcoholics Anonymous, just a little bit, And I don't know how long it was from the time that I got home that day to the time I picked up the phone and I called one of 2 women who reached out to me at those 2 meetings I'd gone to. And I called Janice. I'll be forever grateful for her. I don't see her often in meetings, but I'll be very grateful for her for what she gave me, because she gave me directions. I didn't get suggestions when I got here, and she told me, go stand at the door and welcome people coming into the meeting. She started taking me to meetings. And this is the girl who couldn't talk to people. My tongue would be thick, right? I didn't know what to say to people. I was paralyzed. But I had enough desperation that I'd go sit down, I'd go stand at that door, and I'd welcome the people coming into the rooms. And I heard some things here that still carry me today. Like, all I needed was a mustard seed of faith and willingness, but especially willingness, and I could have what you had. And I didn't know what you had. I just wanted a little relief. And you told me to suit up and show up. bring the body. The mind will follow. I didn't have to think about anything. I could just show up, and that was okay with me at the time. And I started to get busy in the rooms, and you told me to come and set up the meeting and make the coffee, put the chairs and the tables out, come early, 2 hours early, an hour early. And you told me after the meeting to clean things up, to clean the coffee pots, to wipe out the ashtrays. My God, what does cleaning ashtrays have to do with me staying sober? Right? But all that early activity, even cleaning ashtrays, has everything to do with me staying sober. Because all that early activity bought me the time to put those steps into my life. And really, and we heard about it all weekend from our wonderful speakers about, training our feet. We train our feet here. And if we train our feet well, when we get here, when the poo-poo hits the fans, newcomer, because the poo-poo will hit the fans, it's life on life's terms here. If our feet are trained well, we're going to know what to do. And I just started to get busy. And an old-timer pulled me aside, and he said, Christina, if you want to learn something about Alcoholics Anonymous, you need to be teachable and childlike. And what he was really saying to me is, Christina, sit down and shut up. But I got a home group, and I got a sponsor, and I started to get, involved, and these young people started carting me around to meetings, and they invited me to a conference. It was a Cook Forest conference in Cook Forest, PA, and I remember being in the back seat of this big car, and I too was in the middle on the hump. And I remember drinking coffee with all these young people, and I recall my mood to be lighter than it had been in a long time. And somebody popped a cassette into the player, and it was a speaker from the last conference that we were heading to, sharing her experience, strength, and hope. And she started talking about those dark places that I had been and those dark things that I had done. And then she talked about feeling dirtier on the inside than she did on the outside. And no matter how many showers she took, how much soap she used, she couldn't get cleaner on the inside. And for the first time in my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, you guys, I heard somebody put to words how I felt. You see, I identified for the first time. And then she talked about taking these steps, and as the result of these steps, she had a spiritual awakening. And as a result of that awakening and many, many more, that today she said she felt cleaner on the inside than she did on the outside. And you guys, I didn't know what you had when I got here, but I knew what you had when she said that, and I wanted it. And I started to get busy. And I remember being in my 8th and 9th step. I was actually doing amends. And I started to whine to this old-timer. And if you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, you might not want to do that. But I was whining to her about this amends I needed to make. I know I didn't want to make that amends. I was telling her something that happened to me as a child. And she stopped me dead in my tracks. And she said, Christina, when normal people turn 18, they begin this process to grow up, to take responsibility. And when we get to Alcoholics Anonymous, we're well overdue, right? And I was really offended by that lady. But, today I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for those people who are not afraid to hurt my feelings in Alcoholics Anonymous. What she was really telling me was that not that I needed to make amends for something that happened to me as a child. She was telling me that I needed to be, okay with, my reactions about it, my thinking about it, how I go about it. She was tasking me in this process so I could become free of that. And what a huge freedom that is. And my life got better sitting among you in the rooms. I would sit among you, and I would early on feel this comforting feeling sitting with all of you. And then pretty soon, I would have this feeling of comfort on my way to the meetings in anticipation of sitting among you. And then pretty soon, I would feel this comfort after the meetings on my way home, and then it would extend between meetings. And my life started to get better. I met my husband in Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that I loved about him when I met him was his enthusiasm for this thing. I think it's so important to be excited about Alcoholics Anonymous because this thing transforms our lives. And, we talked about the miracles here. And we do this deal together. And I love it. I love it. And I thought when I got here I was going to get this happily ever after, this life-changing, process. I thought I was going to get the white picket fence and all that stuff. But that's not what Alcoholics Anonymous promises us. What we get here is a set of spiritual tools sufficient for anything that I've had to deal with life on life's terms. But more importantly, it's been sufficient for those who go before me, dealing with life on life's terms, right? And I want to tell you a little bit about Rick. Like I said, he was this Pied Piper. He just had this infectious personality. He was excited about sobriety when he was here, and he got really sick from the drink. There were institutions, all of them, every single one. You could check them all off, and he got very sick from the drink and became a wet brain. And I had a front row seat to watch this thing rob him of everything he loved and valued, especially all of you and Alcoholics Anonymous. And, he did make it back into the rooms. I'm going to paint that picture for you because he'd walk through the doors and his pants would be around his ankles, and he'd have no idea. And the men in Alcoholics Anonymous, you guys would go to his aid and scoop him up and get him situated. You bring him back into the rooms, right? Because I heard it this weekend, we don't shoot our wounded here. And I'm so grateful for that, because he would sit in the rooms, but most of the time he'd be talking to himself. He would really not be present. He might be laughing during the speaker, but not at anything that's going on in here, And he caught me at a lucid moment. He said, "Christina, I got to tell you, I got one foot in the door of Alcoholics Anonymous and one foot out, and I can't get back." And I had no idea how profound that statement was when he made it. And I'm in school at the time. You taught me I could be useful and productive. So I'm going back to school. And I had the kids on campus daycare. And I'm... let me just shut that off. I have it on airplane mode, but calls are coming through. And so I'm in school at the time, and... my kids are on campus daycare, and I'm sitting at an 8 o'clock morning class. I have classes till 4. It's Thursday afternoon, or Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon. I'm going to have Rick over because it's his birthday. He's going to see the kids. He hasn't seen the boys in a long time. And 8 o'clock, I have a thought that I'm going to cut class. Maybe start. Rick was heavy on my heart. I can't describe that even today to you. I don't have the words for that. He was just heavy on my heart. I had that thought that I was going to cut class. I'm not a finisher. But I heard your voice, and you said, "No, Christina. When we make a commitment in Alcoholics Anonymous, we see through to the commitments, in and out of the rooms." And I stayed, because that's what you taught me to do. I listened. And 4 o'clock comes around. I pick up the boys. I have this pull all day to go see Rick, and I didn't. I go home and make dinner and prepare for him to come over to see the boys, and he doesn't show. And it's not atypical of this time in his life. No news is good news. I didn't hear anything. I made a couple phone calls, and all was well, and I went to bed that night. The next day I went to school. And I came home. It's Friday. It's my home group night, and I'm packing the boys up, and as a sober mother, a sober member, I'm going to leave my children with people who will care for them properly, and I'm going to take them over to my mom's. And I'm walking out the door, and my phone rings. Before cell phones, so I walk back into the kitchen, and I answer the phone, and it was Rick's mom calling me to tell me that he had passed away. And the coroner's report said he carved his initials in a 9mm bullet, and he shot himself in the head. And what I can tell you about that is this, that there are no bad examples here for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. He did not die in vain. I can learn from everyone. And I know exactly what he did and didn't do. I know he stopped going to his meetings. He stopped picking up his guys, taking them through the steps. He stopped taking those steps himself. Stopped doing all the things that we we learned to do here. And he believed that great lie, that one day he could drink safely again. And I'll never forget the banner that hung behind the podium of my first home group. It said, "Watch well your beginnings. The results will manage themselves." And life went on for me and the boys, and we slowly got to put our lives back together from that great loss. And my life went on in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I continued to get better. And about 3 years after Rick died, my first sponsor, she called me up and she said, "Christina, I just want to tell you that I'm quitting Alcoholics Anonymous." And I thought, whoa, like I didn't know you could do that. And why I like to share that story with you is this. I floundered and became self-directed in AA for probably almost a year, and I don't recommend it. The Big Book tells us that we have a way out upon which we can absolutely agree, upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. You have my solution. My experience has been absolutely consistent. As I take these steps and practice these principles in all my affairs, all my answers come. And I don't have to know how to do everything. I don't have to, know what to say. I just need to show up, and suit up, and have that willingness that was talked about so much this weekend. So important. And I just show up with a little willingness that God meets me where I'm at, and He takes over, right? I just take the action, and He takes over, and I don't have to be invested in that outcome. It's none of my business. My kids, they grew up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and early on they had a lot of behavioral problems. And the women in Alcoholics Anonymous, you guys would tell me that this was normal for newcomer women, and as I stayed sober and got well, they would too. They'll improve. And this did not happen for me. It happens for most men and women who bring children into the rooms. But for me, I would later learn my children would be diagnosed with a serious illness. No cure, just treatment, and I was devastated. And I wallowed in some heavy self-pity until you kicked me in my fanny and made me pull up my big girl pants because you taught me about footwork and you made me get busy. And so I started to research about my kid's illness, and first it was layperson's information, and then it graduated to medical journals, and I became quite the expert in the area of medicine concerning them. And you told me when I first got to you to stand at the door and welcome people coming in, welcome the newcomers. You taught me when I walk into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and there are members already in attendance that I'm to walk around and shake your hand and say hello to you, and all these things that you taught me, all of it. You taught me how to advocate for my children, to speak to the doctors in a language that we needed so that they could get the care that they deserved. And just like when Rick dropped my babies off on my back all those years ago and told me to get up and be the mother I was supposed to be, Alcoholics Anonymous, you gave me that, to be the mother that I needed to be for them. And I'm very grateful. I worked at my son's special school. Early on when they were really little, it was a special school for special needs, and they worked with kids with brain traumas, emotional disturbances. They were gang involved, drug and alcohol involved, autism, you name it. And I got a job as a lunch lady, and I was working there for about a year. And the staff approached me and said that they were creating a new position in the classroom to work with these kids, these troubled youth, and they wanted me to apply for the job. And so I applied, and I had no background, and they hired me. And I got to work with these kids, and I love that. I spent 20 years going to class one day at a time, one class at a time, 1 year at a time. And I was able to walk across the stage at Cleveland State University with my husband, my mother, and my father in attendance. Thank you, AA. And I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, I was honored and privileged to get the Teacher Counselor of the Year award. Thanks to you guys. I believe that, all of that is a direct result of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't take any credit for that. And I don't know, 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago, I felt God pulling me in a different direction in terms of my career, and I traded my medical journals and my pads of paper and pencils for a hard hat and steel-toe boots. And today, I work in the steel mills. I'm a millwright, and if you don't know what a millwright is, it's like a industrial mechanic, you guys, okay? The men probably all know. It's like working on heavy machinery in big industry. And I burn, and I burn metal, and I weld, and I fabricate. But I can't carry a 3-ton chain fall up a ladder, but I can set up the job, and I can work hard, and I love it, you guys. I'm one of 4 female millwrights in the whole entire valley, about 2,500 people. So if you're new, you might not want to be a millwright. But the point is, you can do anything. Anything is possible in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I want to tell you about my God real quick. I didn't not have a God. I just put him away. And from that very first prayer I said, that God help me pray, my first surrender, all the coincidences that turned into God moments, the surrenders, the small ones and the big ones, and all the awakenings, because they continue, thank God. I was able to reestablish that relationship with my higher, and I finally realized that I had undergone that profound alteration in my reaction to life. There's an old timer at my home group, Dave Chajewski was his name, and he used to, so in the Cleveland-Akron area, we have mostly about 85% speaker meetings. And at our speaker meetings, it's probably not something that this area is familiar with, and it's not common in most of the country. We have comments after our speaker sits down. So people stand up like popcorn and thank the speaker. And we call them comments. And this old timer, Dave, he'd stand up every single week and thank the speaker for bringing in the message. And he would always say the same thing, and I would just roll my eyes. Here he goes again. He would always say, I came to, and I came to believe. Ah. But that's been my experience. I came to, and I came to believe, because I would come to your meetings, and I would see the lights in your eyes and the smiles on your faces. And I would hear the chatter in the room, right? And you told me to take an action that I don't yet believe in, and you told me that, that my ego likes to solve the problems, right? And program tells me to take an action instead. And I start to take these actions, right? And I don't even know why I'm doing it, but I'm taking these actions. And any action, I believe, that we take in Alcoholics Anonymous is an act of humility, right? Because really what it's saying is, I can't, but we can. And so I start to take these actions, and I come to. And on the back of these actions that I have are these experiences, and first they look like coincidences, unbeknownst to me, but then they turn into God moments. And these experiences, because AA is experiential here. We experience this thing. I know we have feelings and we talk about our feelings, but it's experiential. That's why it's so powerful. That's why we move, to help others and give it away, because it's experiential. And we have these experiences, and they started to build this foundation around me, these experiences, and they began to challenge my old ideas and my belief systems, and I came to believe. And every day, I make a decision between my God and my ego. And if it's loving, it's of God. If it's not loving, it's not of God, period, right? And, and I have this friend, Martin Eyre. Oh, I shouldn't have mentioned his last name. He's a good friend of mine. I love Martin. And I was being judgy and talking about somebody to Martin. I was sharing my judgments with Martin and a little upset. And I said to him, Martin, the highest we ever get in Alcoholics Anonymous his humble servant. And he said, no, Christina, the highest we ever get here is member. Because I'm never right here with you. I'm always up here looking down at you, or down here looking up at you. I'm never enough. It's always this game, and I love it. In Alcoholics Anonymous, I can be right-sized, and I got right-sized that day, and it brought me right back to you. And thank God, right? And when I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, no more and no less, I get to be, a member of my community, and I get to do the things that I get to do out in the world and carry this out, practice these principles in all our affairs. And that old-timer, Frankie O., who I love so much that I lost up in Toronto, Canada, when he would talk from the podium, he'd talk about waking up in Alcoholics Anonymous, being awake in life and being present. And that's a powerful message, because I can miss it. I can miss it all, just like that. And I don't want to miss anything today. I don't want to miss, being here in the moment with all of you and this whole weekend. And I don't want to miss the newcomer when they're walking in the door. I don't want to miss my beautiful niece as she's sharing her stories, like the time that she was telling me a story about a little girl that burped up a cupcake in class. I don't want to miss my sons when they experience joy and success. My dear beloved longtime sponsor, Beth Gordon. I used to call her nickname was DBS, for dear beloved sponsor. And when she would talk about Alcoholics Anonymous in any kind of way, from the podium or not, she would talk about it, and she would say, Alcoholics Anonymous is the greatest love story ever written and ever told. And you guys, isn't it true? From our earliest beginnings at Bedside to our humble neighborhood meetings and home groups to gatherings such as this, or Founders Day, it's one alcoholic sharing experience, strength, and hope with another that we come home. So I like to close with a little story about a little boy who walks into Sunday church with his mom for the very first time, and he looks up at the beautiful stained glass windows and he says, Mommy, who are those glass people? And his mother says, well, those are the saints. And the little boy goes to school the next day. He's still in awe from that day, at church, and his teacher asked him what he did over the weekend, and he said, I saw the saints. And she's like, well, who are the saints? And he says, the saints, they're the ones that let the light in. So I want to thank all of you for always being present in the moment for this alcoholic. I want to thank Alcoholics Anonymous for letting the light in. Thank you for my life. Thank you.